Nostiti, apply pressure. He's lost a lot of blood. We need to stabilize him before we get to the hospital. The ambulance lights flashed widely, painting streaks of red and white across the dark, silent street. Chinedu was laying unconscious on the stretcher. His face was pale and his breath was shallow. The paramedics moved swiftly, their voices firm yet urgent. He's lost a lot of blood. We need to stabilize him before we get him to the hospital, one of them said, applying pressure to a wound on his side. Standing a few feet away, a woman in a sleek black dress watched emotionlessly. Her expression betrayed no concern, no panic. She slowly turned, slipped into her car, and drove off as if nothing had happened. Chinedu was what people called a dream man, handsome, successful, and generous to a fault. He was the perfect catch. At 37, he was the CEO of Ndo Oil and Gas, a billion-dollar empire built by his late father. Despite his wealth, Chinedu was very humble. He believed in helping people, funding scholarships, and supporting small businesses. But for all his achievements, he had one glaring weakness: love. Chinedu had always been unlucky in relationships. Every woman he dated seemed more interested in his money than him. His last relationship ended when he overheard his ex laughing with her friends, calling him an ATM with a heartbeat. Since then, he had avoided women who showed even the slightest interest in his wealth. Then came Adora. Adora entered Chinedu's life at a networking event hosted by one of his business partners. She wasn't the type to command attention. She wore a simple cream-colored dress and kept to herself, sipping wine and smiling politely when people approached her. Chinedu noticed her because she didn't seem impressed by the glitz of the event, while others frowned over him. Adora barely looked his way. Intrigued, he approached her. Not enjoying the party, he asked, offering his trademark smile. Adora chuckled softly. It's overwhelming. I'm not used to this kind of crowd. Her humility struck a chord with Chinedu. They talked for hours, and by the end of the night, Chinedu felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Adora told Chinedu she was a teacher who ran a small NGO for underprivileged children. She painted herself as someone who understood struggle, someone who had worked hard to earn everything she had. Chinedu admired her selflessness and her simplicity. Their romance blossomed quickly. Adora seemed uninterested in his money. She insisted on splitting bills whenever they went out and often turned down his expensive gifts. To Chinedu, she was the one, a woman who loved him for who he was, not what he had. But Adora, wasn't the angel she appeared to be. Unbeknown to Chinedu, Adora had been watching him long before they met. She knew his fortune, his likes and dislikes, and even his vulnerabilities. She had carefully crafted her personality to appeal to him. Every story she told him, every gesture she made, was all part of a grand scheme. Adora wasn't alone in her plot. She was working with a man named Collins, a former banker turned scam artist. Collins had a knack for spotting wealthy but naive targets, and Chinedu was the biggest one yet. Collins had known Chinedu's income flow as he worked in a reputable bank. Months into their relationship, Chinedu felt a peace he hadn't known in years. For the first time, he believed he had found a woman who wasn't after his wealth, but his heart. Every moment with Adora felt genuine. The quiet dinners, the long walk, and the way she always seemed to care more about his well-being than anything material. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of his mansion overlooking the city, Chinedu held Adora's hand and said, "You've changed my life, Adora. I don't even know how I managed before I met you." Adora smiled, her eyes glistening in the soft glow of the balcony light. You give me too much credit, Chinedu. I should be the one thanking you. You've shown me what it means to dream again. Her voice wavered slightly, and Chinedu, ever the empath, reached over to cradle her face in his hand. I don't know if I say it enough, but I never felt this way about anyone. You are my dream come through, Adora. I want to make this official. Adora's heart skipped a beat, not because of love, but because she had been waiting for this exact moment. Her lips quivered as she feigned surprise. Chinedu, are you saying what I'm thinking? Chinedu didn't hesitate. He stood up, reached into his pocket, and brought out a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond ring so exquisite that it caught the moonlight, scattering in tiny beams. Marry me, Adora, he said, his voice thick with emotions. Be my partner, my equal. Let's build a future together. Tears streamed down Adora's face, and she gasped as though overwhelmed. Yes, Chinedu. Yes, I will marry you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Chinedu swept her into his arms, spinning her around as the city lights sparkled in the distance. He felt invisible, as though he had finally unlocked the secret to happiness. The wedding planning began almost immediately. Chinedu insisted on a small but elegant affair, inviting only close friends and family. Adora pretended to agree, suggesting intimate venues, but behind the scene, she nudged for a more extravagant event. She knew the bigger the wedding, the more people would assume she was truly in love with him. On the day of the ceremony, Chinedu stood in front of a guarded archway surrounded by roses. His heart raced as Adora walked down the aisle, her beauty amplified by the sunlight streaming through the chapel. She looked every bit the devoted bride, her steps slow and deliberate, her gaze locked on his. I do, she said softly when the vows were exchanged, her eyes shimmering with what appeared to be love. Chinedu's voice cracked as he echoed the same. In that moment, he felt he had everything he could ever wanted. A few weeks into their marriage, Adora began to plant the seed for the final phase of her plan. She started small, dropping hints about shared responsibilities and long-term financial security. One evening, as they lounged on the living room after dinner, Adora casually brought up the topic. Chinedu, have you ever thought about how we are handling our finances now that we are married? Chinedu, sipping his wine, raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Everything seems fine, doesn't it? It is, Adora said quickly, her tone light. But I was just thinking, shouldn't we combine some of our resources, for emergencies or investment? I don't want you to bear all the financial burden alone. We are a team now. Chinedu smiled at her thoughtfulness. Adora, I would never want you to feel burdened. My wealth is our wealth now. There's no need for you to worry. I know, Adora said, her fingers tracing patterns on the armrest of the couch. But it's not just about worry. I want to contribute too. Maybe we could set up a joint account. Something we both manage together. It's just an idea. Chinedu hesitated. His upbringing had taught him to always be cautious with money, especially after seeing how people had taken advantage of his father's generosity. But Adora wasn't like those people. She had proven herself to be different. A joint account? He repeated, thinking it over. I suppose that makes sense. Adora leaned forward. Her eyes was earnest. It's for us, Chinedu, for our future. Imagine what we could achieve together if we both had access to the same resources. Her words stirred something in him. He had always dreamed of a partner who would walk beside him, someone who thoroughly understood what it meant to build a legacy together. In Adora, he believed he had found that partner. Yeah, you are right, he said finally. We are a team. Let's set it up. Thank you, Chinedu. I just want to make sure we are prepared for anything. This particular night, Chinedu woke up suddenly. The room was pitch black, the only sound coming from the some hum of the air conditioner. He instinctively reached out to Adora's side of the bed, but his hand met cold, empty sheets. Where could she be at this hour? He wondered, rubbing his eyes. He glanced at the clock. It was 2:47 a.m. Chinedu sat up, listening for any sound in the house. The faint creak of the gate outside caught his attention. Concerned, he slipped on his robe and padded downstairs. The living room was empty, but through the curtains, he noticed the faint glow of headlights disappearing down the driveway. His heart sank. Adora had left without a word. For a moment, he tried to calm himself. Maybe she went to check on a friend in need, he thought, though a knot of unease began to tighten in his chest. He dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. The rest of the night was sleepless for Chinedu. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with questions. By the time Adora returned the next day, he was waiting for her in the living room. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice low but firm. Adora froze, clearly startled to see him awake. I went to see Kemi," she stammered. She had a family emergency and needed someone to talk to. Chinedu studied her carefully. Her hair was neatly styled and her makeup looked freshly done, hardly the appearance of someone who had spent the night consoling a friend. Still, he decided not to press her. "Kemi?" At 3 a.m., he asked, masking his doubt. "She's like a sister to me, you know now," Adora replied, sitting beside him and placing a hand on his knee. "You know I'll do the same for anyone I care about." Chinedu nodded slowly, but had his doubt. A few days later, Chinedu received a call from his accountant, Mr. Okoro, during a meeting at his office. The tone of urgency in Mr. Okoro's voice immediately put Chinedu on edge. "Sir, I've noticed some unusual transactions in your account," Mr. Okoro began. "Large sums have been transferred to an offshore entity over the past few weeks. Did you authorize this?" Chinedu frowned. "No, I didn't." "Are you sure?" "Yes, sir. The transfer are significant. Millions of naira," Mr. Okoro said. "I thought I should bring it to your attention immediately." Chinedu ended the call, his mind confused. Millions? Offshore account? Who could have done this? At home that evening, he decided to confront Adora. As she busied herself in the kitchen, humming softly, Chinedu approached her. "Adora, can we talk?" he asked, his voice steady but serious. She turned, flashing him her unusual warm smile. "Of course, my baby. What's on your mind?" Chinedu hesitated for a moment, then plunged ahead. "There have been some irregularities in my account. Large amounts of money have been transferred without my knowledge. Do you know anything about this?" Adora's expression didn't falter. Instead, she looked genuinely confused. "Me? Why would I know anything about that? I don't even have access to your business account." "It's not just business account," Chinedu said, watching her closely. "Some of our joint assets are involved too." At this, Adora's eyes widened and she took a step closer to him. "Chinedu, are you accusing me of something?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would I ever steal from you? I thought you trusted me." Her reaction threw him off balance. The tears in her eyes, the quiver in her voice, it all seemed so sincere. For a brief moment, he doubted himself. "I'm not accusing you," he said, softening his tone, "but I need to understand what's going on. These transfers are significant." Adora wiped her tears and shook her head. "Maybe it's a mistake or maybe someone hacked the account. You should talk to your bank. They'll sort it out." The following week, Chinedu received another call from Mr. Okoro. "Sir, I've been digging deep into the transactions and I've traced them to an account linked to someone named Collins." Chinedu frowned. "Collins? I don't know anyone by that name." "I thought as much," Mr. Okoro said. "But here's the troubling part. This account has connections to your wife. I'm still investigating, but I thought you should know." The revelation hit Chinedu like a punch to his gut. His hand trembled as he ended the call. Could it be true? Could Adora, the woman he had trusted with his heart and his wealth, be behind this? That evening, as he sat alone in his study, Chinedu replayed every interaction he had with Adora over the past few months. The little inconsistencies, the sudden late-night outing, her insistence on setting up joint accounts, it all began to make sense. He felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over him. But more than that, he felt foolish. How could he have let this happen? Instead of confronting Adora immediately, Chinedu decided to call someone he trusted, Amaka, his childhood friend and a private investigator. If anyone could uncover the truth, it was her. Chinedu picked up her phone and called Amaka, his voice shaking. "Amaka, I need your help." "Chinedu, what's wrong?" she asked immediately, sensing the urgency. "It's Adora," he said, his words faltering. I think she's stealing from me, but I need proof." There was a pause. Then Amaka's voice came through, firm and unwavering. "I'll be at your house in an hour." When Amaka arrived, Chinedu explained everything to her. The strange transactions, the offshore accounts linked to Collins and Adora's late-night disappearances. Amaka listened carefully, her expression hardened with every detail. "I warned you about rushing into this marriage, didn't I?" she said bluntly, her eyes narrowing. "But we are here now and I'll get to the bottom of this." Amaka wasted no time. She began by digging into Adora's background, calling in favors and scouring records. What she found left her stunned. Adora's real name wasn't listed anywhere. The NGO she claimed to run didn't exist. And then there was Collins, a notorious con artist with a long history of financial crimes. Amaka presented her findings to Chinedu 2 days later. "She's been playing you from the start," she said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were documents linking Adora and Collins to several wealthy men who had mysteriously lost their fortunes after brief relationships. Chinedu's hand shook as he flipped through the evidence. "How could I have been so blind?" he whispered. "Don't beat yourself up," Amaka said. "People like Adora and Collins are professional. They know how to manipulate emotions, but they are not invisible, and I have a plan." Amaka's plan was simple but effective. Lure Adora into making one final move. To do this, Chinedu had to play his part perfectly. He staged a financial crisis, spreading news through his business associates that his company was on the verge of bankruptcy. He even gave an emotional interview to a prominent business magazine, lamenting the difficulties of navigating the current economy. At home, he acted stressed and distracted, ensuring Adora overheard phone calls where he spoke of dwindling resources and desperate measures. Adora, believing her time was running out, began pushing for a final transfer. One evening, as they sat at a dinner, Adora placed her hand on his. "Chinedu, I've been thinking, if things are really this bad, maybe we should move some of our remaining funds to a safer account." Chinedu looked up, his expression wary. "You mean like an offshore account?" "Yes," Adora said quickly, "just as a precaution. You've worked so hard for everything we have. It would be a shame to lose it all." Chinedu nodded slowly, feeling reluctant. "I'll think about it." Behind the scenes, Amaka was monitoring everything. She had tapped Adora's phone and was tracking her communication with Collins. It didn't take long for Adora to arrange a meeting with him to discuss the transfer. On the day of the meeting, Chinedu pretended to leave for work but doubled back and hid in the guest room. Amaka stationed in a car outside, listening through her equipment as Adora called Collins. "It's happening today," Adora said, her voice tinged with excitement. "He's transferring the fund this afternoon. Once they hit the account, we are gone." "Good," Collins replied. "I've already booked our flight. Make sure you don't slip up." Amaka smiled to herself. "Gotcha," she muttered. Later that evening, Chinedu and Amaka put the final phase of their plan into action. Chinedu pretended to sign the transfer document, but they were actually falsified papers prepared by Amaka. The account Adora believed would receive the fund was a decoy link to law enforcement. As Adora prepared to leave the house, Chinedu stopped her. "Wait," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." Adora froze. "What about?" she asked, her tone light but guided. Chinedu held up the fake transfer document. "About this and about Collins." For a moment, Adora's smirks slipped and her eyes widened in panic, but she quickly recovered, letting out a nervous laugh. I don't know what you are talking about. Stop lying, Chinedu said, his voice rising. I know everything. The fake NGO, the offshore account, the other men you and Collins have scammed. It's over, Adora. Before she could respond, the door burst open and police officers flooded into the room. Amaka followed, holding a small recorder. We have your phone conversations, she said, her voice cold, and the documents tying you and Collins to multiple crimes. Adora's composure shattered. You think you've won, she snarled, her voice filled with venom. You will never get your money back. Collins and I planned for this. But Amaka only smirked. We planned better. All your accounts are frozen. And Collins was picked up an hour ago at the airport. You are done for. Adora's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. In a last-ditch effort, she grabbed a sharp letter opener from the table and lunged at Chinedu. He tried to block her, but the blade caught his side and he fell to the ground, clutching his wound. The officers tackled Adora to the floor as Amaka rushed to Chinedu's side. Chinedu, Amaka shouted, rushing to his side as the officers restrained Adora once and for all. Call an ambulance, one of the officers yelled, pulling out his radio. Adora was dragged out of the room, screaming and kicking. This isn't over. I will make you pay, she yelled, her voice echoing through the halls. Amaka pressed her hand against Chinedu's wound, her face pale but determined. Stay with me, Chinedu. Help is on the way. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Chinedu lay on the bed, his face pale but his breathing steady. The wound on his side had required stitches, but the doctors assured Amaka he would make a full recovery. Amaka sat by his bedside, her hands folded in her laps. For the first time in years, she looked vulnerable. She had always been the strong one, the one who didn't flinch in the face of danger. But seeing Chinedu on that stretcher had shaken her to the core. When Chinedu finally opened his eyes, he saw her sitting there and managed a weak smile. You look like you've seen a ghost. Amaka let out a shaky laugh, weeping at her eyes. You are not allowed to scare me like this ever again. Thank you, Amaka, for everything. Amaka shook her head. Don't thank me. Just promise me you will be more careful from now on. A week later, Chinedu was discharged from the hospital. The media had gotten wind of the story, and it was all over the news. Headlines like billionaire CEO duped by wife and con artist arrested in high-stakes scheme dominated the front pages. Adora and Collins were charged with fraud and attempted murder. During the trial, more victims of their scheme came forward, each telling stories similar to Chinedu's. The evidence Amaka had gathered was outright, and both Adora and Collins received lengthy prison sentence. Back at home, Chinedu struggled to adjust. The betrayal had left deep emotional scars, and there were days when he couldn't bring himself to step out of the house. The thought of trusting someone again seemed impossible. Amaka, however, refused to let him wallow. You are stronger than this, she told him one afternoon as they sat in the garden. You let one person fool you, but that doesn't mean the world is full of Adoras. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again, Chinedu admitted, his voice heavy with doubt. You don't have to trust everyone, Amaka said gently, but you can start by trusting yourself. You are not as naive as you think. You just have a good heart, and that's not something to be ashamed of. Her words stayed with him. Slowly but surely, Chinedu began to rebuild his life. He focused on his work, his philanthropy, and strengthening his relationship with people who truly care about him. Amaka remained a constant presence, always pushing him to move forward. Months later, Chinedu stood before a crowd at a charity gala, the same kind of event where he had first met Adora. This time, however, he wasn't looking for love. He was there to announce a new foundation aimed at helping victims of financial fraud. As he spoke, he spotted Amaka in the crowd, smiling proudly. In that moment, he realized something important. While Adora had been a curse, Amaka had been his blessing. And sometimes, the people who save you are the ones who were there all along. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and don't forget to share this story with your family and your friends whom I love to see them. Till I see you again in my next story. Goodbye.